The radar blip moves steadily eastward across the screen, a small green dot representing 144 souls flying through the darkness at 37,000 feet. But something is terribly wrong. The controller at Minneapolis Center keys his microphone for the 7th time in 12 minutes, his voice calm but edged with growing concern. Atlantic Coastal Flight 5216, Minneapolis Center, radio check. Silence. He tries again, louder this time, as if volume could somehow penetrate the strange void that has swallowed this aircraft. Atlantic Coastal 5216, Minneapolis Center. How do you read? Nothing. Just the soft hiss of static and the background murmur of other flights checking in, reporting altitudes, requesting clearances. But from Flight 5216, traveling from Los Angeles to Chicago on this October evening in 2009, there is only silence. Complete, absolute, inexplicable silence. I am Captain Paul Henderson. I have spent more than 25 years in the left seat of commercial aircraft, guiding metal birds safely through storms and clear skies, through mechanical failures and human errors, through moments of terror and hours of tedium. I have seen things that would give passengers nightmares if they knew. I have made decisions in seconds that affected hundreds of lives. I have landed aircraft with failed engines, fought through microbursts, recovered from near stalls at altitude. But in all my years, I have never encountered anything quite like what happened aboard Atlantic Coastal Flight 5216. This is not a story about a crash. Nobody died that night. The aircraft landed safely, its passengers unaware that anything unusual had occurred. But what happened in that cockpit? The reason why two professional aviators lost complete awareness of their surroundings for over 70 minutes created shockwaves through the aviation industry that are still felt today. This is a story about distraction, about complacency, about how easily even experienced pilots can lose the plot when they stop paying attention to the most fundamental aspects of their job. What you are about to hear will seem almost impossible to believe. It certainly seemed impossible to the investigators who pieced together what happened. It seemed impossible to the airline executives who had to explain it to the public. It seemed impossible to me when I first learned the details. But it happened. Every word of it is true, and it serves as a stark reminder that in aviation, constant vigilance is not just important, it is everything. Welcome aboard. October 19th, 2009. Los Angeles International Airport sprawls beneath the California sun, its 4 parallel runways shimmering in the afternoon heat. Terminal 4 is crowded with travelers, the usual mix of business executives with roller bags and laptops, families heading home after Disneyland vacations, college students visiting relatives, retirees escaping to the Midwest to see autumn colors. At Gate 18, Atlantic Coastal Flight 5216 is boarding passengers for the evening flight to Chicago. The aircraft is an Airbus A320, 14 years old with 38,000 hours on the airframe. She is well maintained, her logbook showing consistent compliance with all maintenance schedules and service bulletins. There is nothing mechanically wrong with this airplane. The problem tonight will be entirely human. 139 passengers settle into their seats, stowing bags, adjusting seatbelts, scrolling through phones before the door closes. 5 flight attendants complete their pre-flight checks in the cabin, counting meals, testing emergency equipment, reviewing passenger manifests. Everyone is professional, experienced, competent. This is just another evening flight, routine as sunrise. In the flight deck, 2 pilots occupy the control seats. Captain Richard Holbrook sits on the left. He is 51 years old with over 16,000 hours of total flight time. He has been flying for Atlantic Coastal for 19 years. He is steady, reliable, the kind of pilot who has seen everything and never gets flustered. His annual proficiency checks are always satisfactory. His line check last quarter showed no deficiencies. He is exactly the kind of pilot airlines want in command. First Officer Thomas Weber occupies the right seat. He is 49 years old with 11,000 hours total time. He has been with Atlantic Coastal for 12 years. Like Captain Holbrook, he is experienced and capable. His training records show consistent performance. There are no flags in his file, no incidents, no concerns, just a solid professional doing his job. But on this October evening, these 2 experienced aviators are about to demonstrate that experience alone is not enough, that professionalism requires constant attention, and that even the best pilots can make catastrophic errors in judgment when they allow themselves to become distracted. The boarding process completes at 5:48 in the evening Pacific time. The main cabin door swings closed with its characteristic thump. The gate agent disconnects the jet bridge. Captain Holbrook receives clearance from ramp control to push back from the gate. The ground crew connects the pushback tug. The aircraft begins rolling backward, away from the terminal, engines still silent. Once clear of the gate area, the tug disconnects. Captain Holbrook starts both engines. The CFM56 turbofans spin up to idle power with their distinctive whine. All indications are normal. Oil pressure good. Exhaust gas temperatures rising normally. No warning lights. The aircraft is ready to fly. Ground control clears them to taxi to runway 24 left. Captain Holbrook advances the thrust levers slightly. The A320 begins rolling forward along the taxiway, following the yellow centerline markings. They pass other aircraft waiting their turn. Massive wide-body jets bound for Asia and Europe. Regional jets heading to smaller cities. Cargo freighters preparing for nighttime operations. The tower is busy but efficient, choreographing the dance of departures and arrivals with practiced precision. At 6:17 they reach the departure end of runway 24 left, 3 aircraft ahead of them in the queue. They wait, running through the before takeoff checklist, reviewing performance data, confirming the departure procedure. Everything is methodical, professional, routine. At 6:29, the tower clears them for takeoff. Captain Holbrook lines up on the center line. First Officer Weber calls out the clearance. Atlantic Coastal 5216, cleared for takeoff runway 24 left, fly heading 270, climb and maintain 15,000. Cleared for takeoff 24 left, heading 270, 15,000. Atlantic Coastal 5216, Holbrook confirms. He advances the thrust levers to the takeoff detent. The engines spool up to maximum power. The aircraft accelerates down the runway, gaining speed rapidly. 80 knots, Weber calls. Check, Holbrook responds. V1, the decision speed. They are now committed to the takeoff. Any attempt to abort would run them off the end of the runway. Rotate. Holbrook pulls back gently on the side stick controller. The nose lifts. The main landing gear leaves the pavement. Flight 5216 is airborne, climbing into the darkening sky above Los Angeles. The departure is flawless. They follow the published procedure exactly, turning to the assigned heading, climbing through the complex airspace around one of the world's busiest airports. At 10,000 feet, the sterile cockpit rule technically ends. Below that altitude, conversation is supposed to be limited strictly to matters related to the flight. Above 10,000 feet, some casual conversation is permitted, though pilots are expected to remain focused on their duties. They continue climbing, passing through 20,000 feet, then 30,000. Los Angeles Center clears them to their final cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. The autopilot captures the altitude, leveling the aircraft smoothly. The autothrottle adjusts engine power to maintain cruise speed. Everything is stable, smooth, routine. This is the phase of flight where pilots can relax slightly. The critical moments of takeoff are behind them. The approach and landing are still hours away. The aircraft is functioning perfectly, following its programmed route with computer precision. The sky is clear, the air smooth. There is nothing to do but monitor systems and maintain radio contact with air traffic control. But it is also the phase of flight where complacency can creep in, where attention can wander, where discipline can slip. And that is exactly what is about to happen. The flight proceeds eastward, crossing from California into Nevada, then Arizona. The sun sets behind them, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples before fading to darkness. Below, the lights of cities appear, glowing clusters in the vast black desert. Las Vegas passes beneath them, a bright oasis in the darkness. Then the lights thin out as they cross into New Mexico and Colorado. Inside the cockpit, Captain Holbrook and First Officer Weber settle into the rhythm of a long cruise. They have flown together before. They are comfortable with each other, familiar with each other's habits and procedures. They chat about upcoming schedules, about trips they have bid for, about changes happening at the airline. Atlantic Coastal is in the process of merging with another carrier. There are concerns about seniority integration, about base assignments, about whether pilots will keep their current positions or be displaced. It is a topic that concerns every pilot at the airline. Jobs, careers, livelihoods are at stake, and as they cruise through the darkness somewhere over Colorado, Captain Holbrook and First Officer Weber begin discussing these concerns in detail. Now here is where the story takes its strange turn, because what happens next is so mundane, so ordinary, that it seems almost impossible it could lead to a major incident. But that is often how disasters begin in aviation, not with dramatic failures or catastrophic malfunctions, but with small deviations from procedure, tiny lapses in discipline, minor distractions that snowball into something much larger. Captain Holbrook pulls out his personal laptop computer. This alone is a violation of airline policy. Personal electronic devices are not permitted in the cockpit during flight operations. The rule exists for exactly the reason you would think. Pilots need to remain focused on flying the aircraft. Distractions can be deadly. But on this night, Holbrook decides to pull up some documents related to the airline merger, spreadsheets showing seniority lists, projections of how the integration might affect different pilot groups. First Officer Weber leans over to look at the screen. They begin discussing the implications, comparing notes, debating scenarios. Weber pulls out his own laptop, opens similar files. Now both pilots are hunched over computer screens, absorbed in spreadsheets and documents discussing union politics and merger implications, and they stop paying attention to the flight. It is not a sudden thing. They do not consciously decide to ignore their duties. It happens gradually, imperceptibly. Their focus narrows to the laptops in front of them. The instruments fade into peripheral awareness. The radio becomes background noise. They are still physically in the cockpit, but mentally they have checked out, absorbed completely in their discussion about the merger. The Airbus continues flying itself, following its programmed route with perfect precision. The autopilot maintains altitude and heading. The auto-throttle maintains speed. The flight management computer navigates from waypoint to waypoint. From a technical standpoint, everything is functioning flawlessly, but the pilots are not doing their job. They are not monitoring the instruments. They are not tracking their position. They are not listening to the radio. They have essentially abandoned their posts, leaving the aircraft to fly itself while they focus on their laptops. At Minneapolis Center, a controller named David Patterson is working the high-altitude sector, covering airspace from the Dakotas south to Kansas. On his radar screen, Flight 5216 appears as it should, cruising eastward at 37,000 feet, approaching the boundary where Patterson will hand it off to Chicago Center. He keys his microphone to begin the handoff process. Atlantic Coastal 5216. Minneapolis Center, contact Chicago Center, now on frequency 132.4. He waits for the standard response. Pilots should read back the frequency and acknowledge the handoff. It is one of the most routine transmissions in aviation, happening thousands of times every day. But there is no response. Patterson frowns slightly. Maybe they missed the call. Maybe they were changing frequencies at that moment. Maybe there was radio interference. It happens. He waits a few seconds and tries again. Atlantic Coastal 5216 Minneapolis Center. Contact Chicago on 132.4. Still nothing. Now Patterson is paying closer attention. He watches the radar return. The aircraft is maintaining altitude and course. There are no squawks indicating an emergency. Everything appears normal except for the lack of radio response. He tries a third time. Atlantic Coastal 5216 Minneapolis Center. Radio check. How do you read? Silence. This is no longer routine. This is a problem. Aircraft do not simply stop responding to air traffic control. There are procedures for this situation, escalating protocols designed to determine what is wrong and how to fix it. Patterson begins implementing them. He contacts other aircraft in the vicinity, asking them to try reaching Flight 5216 on the air-to-air frequency that all aircraft monitor. One by one, they try. Atlantic Coastal 5216. This is United 407. Do you read? No response. Atlantic Coastal 5216, American 235 calling. How copy? Nothing. Patterson notifies his supervisor. They discuss possibilities. Medical emergency? Both pilots incapacitated? Pressurization failure leaving them unconscious from hypoxia? Electrical failure knocking out all radios? But the transponder is still working, still sending altitude and identification data. If they had electrical problems severe enough to kill all radios, the transponder would likely be affected too. The supervisor makes a decision. He contacts the Airline Operations Center, asking them to try reaching the flight through the aircraft communications addressing and reporting system. a text-based data link that allows ground personnel to communicate with aircraft even when voice radio fails. They send a message to Flight 5216. In the cockpit, a chime sounds, indicating an incoming message. Neither pilot notices. They are deep in conversation about the merger, pointing at laptop screens, debating the finer points of seniority integration. Minutes pass. The aircraft continues eastward, tracking precisely along its programmed route. It approaches a waypoint where it should begin descending for its arrival into Chicago. The flight management computer is ready to begin the descent. All it needs is clearance from air traffic control and a command from the pilots to initiate the descent. But the pilots are not paying attention. They do not request descent clearance. They do not even notice that they are approaching the point where they should be descending. They are completely absorbed in their laptops and their discussion. The aircraft passes the descent waypoint and continues flying eastbound at 37,000 feet, its nose pointed toward Chicago, but not descending, not slowing, just cruising straight and level, as if the destination did not exist. At Minneapolis Center, alarm bells are ringing now, both literally and figuratively. The supervisor has escalated the situation to the facility manager. They have contacted the North American Aerospace Defense Command, informing them of an aircraft that is not responding to any communications. This is 2009, just 8 years after September 11th. An airliner that does not respond to radio calls is treated as a potential threat. Protocols are clear and non-negotiable. NORAD places fighter jets on alert. At an Air National Guard base, pilots run to their aircraft. Engines start. Weapons are armed. They are prepared to launch at a moment's notice if Flight 5216 shows any sign of hostile intent. The aircraft continues eastward. It passes over Chicago, the city where it should have landed, without descending, without slowing, without deviating from its eastward course. Passengers in the cabin have no idea anything is wrong. They are reading, sleeping, watching movies on personal devices. The flight attendants are preparing for landing, collecting trash, making sure seatbacks and tray tables are in their upright positions. But the aircraft makes no move to land. It just keeps flying. Miles accumulate. 10 miles past Chicago. 20. 50. The aircraft is now over Indiana, heading toward Ohio, still at 37,000 feet, still cruising at normal speed, still not responding to increasingly frantic calls from air traffic control. 100 miles past Chicago. In the cockpit, Captain Holbrook and First Officer Weber remain focused on their laptops, utterly unaware that they have blown past their destination, that air traffic controllers across multiple states are trying desperately to contact them, that fighter jets are preparing to intercept them, that they are minutes away from becoming an international incident. 150 miles past Chicago. At this point, fuel is becoming a consideration. The aircraft was loaded with enough fuel to fly from Los Angeles to Chicago with normal reserves. It was not loaded for a cross-country flight to the East Coast. If the pilots do not turn around soon, they will face a fuel emergency. But they remain oblivious, their attention locked on laptop screens showing seniority lists and merger projections. Controllers try everything. They broadcast on emergency frequencies. They send more data link messages. They have other aircraft try to make contact. Nothing works. Flight 5216 continues its ghost-like journey eastward. 2 pilots aboard but nobody apparently in control. And then, finally, after 1 hour and 18 minutes of complete radio silence, something changes. Inside the cockpit, a flight attendant calls on the interphone, asking about their arrival time into Chicago. She wants to know when to make the final landing announcement to passengers. Captain Holbrook picks up the phone, and as he speaks to her, his eyes happen to glance at the navigation display. What he sees makes his blood run cold. They are over Wisconsin. Wisconsin, east of Chicago, far east of Chicago. He looks at the clock. They should have landed 20 minutes ago. He looks at the flight management computer. It shows they have passed Chicago by more than 150 miles. "Oh my God," he says. First Officer Weber looks up from his laptop, confused by the captain's tone. Then he sees the navigation display. His face goes pale. They have been so absorbed in their discussion, so focused on their laptops, that they have completely lost situational awareness. They have ignored the radio. They have missed their descent point. They have flown right past their destination without noticing, and they have been out of contact with air traffic control for over an hour. The magnitude of what has happened crashes down on them. This is not a minor mistake. This is career-ending. This is the kind of error that makes headlines. This is the kind of thing that gets pilots fired and certificates revoked. Holbrook grabs the radio microphone with shaking hands. Minneapolis Center, Atlantic Coastal 5216. The response is immediate. The controller's voice tight with controlled urgency. Atlantic Coastal 5216, Minneapolis Center. Say your position and intentions immediately. We've been distracted up here, Holbrook stammers, trying to keep his voice steady. We are over Eau Claire, Wisconsin. We need to return to Chicago. There is a pause. Patterson, the controller, takes a breath, forcing himself to remain professional. Atlantic Coastal 5216, Roger. Turn left heading 270. Descend and maintain flight level 330. Can you provide any information about your situation? We got distracted discussing company business, Holbrook says, the words sounding hollow and pathetic even to his own ears. We missed our descent point. Another pause. Patterson is writing notes furiously, documenting every word. Atlantic Coastal 5216, understood. Continue left to heading 240, descend and maintain flight level 240. Contact Chicago approach on frequency 120.55. 240, flight level 240, 120.55, Atlantic Coastal 5216. Holbrook switches frequencies. His hands are trembling. Weber sits in stunned silence, staring at the navigation display as if he cannot believe what he is seeing. They have just committed one of the most spectacular errors in modern aviation history, and they both know it. The flight back to Chicago takes 35 minutes. Controllers vector them carefully, keeping them separated from other traffic. The fighter jets stand down but remain on alert. NORAD continues monitoring the situation. Nobody is taking any chances until this aircraft is safely on the ground. In the cabin, passengers remain unaware that anything unusual has happened. The flight attendants make an announcement apologizing for the delay, attributing it to air traffic control requirements. Nobody panics. Nobody suspects that their pilots just flew 150 miles past the destination because they were distracted by laptops. At 9:48 in the evening Central Time, 1 hour and 41 minutes after they should have landed, Flight 5216 touches down on runway 10 right at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The landing is smooth, professional. The aircraft taxis to the gate normally. Passengers deplane, collect their bags, head home or to hotels, thinking this was just another delayed flight, nothing more. But as the cockpit door opens, Captain Holbrook and First Officer Weber find themselves face to face with airline management, FAA inspectors and airport security. They are escorted off the aircraft and taken to separate rooms for questioning. Their careers, they both realize, are over. The investigation that follows is swift and thorough. The cockpit voice recorder captures everything. Every word of their conversation about the merger. Every minute they spent discussing seniority lists instead of flying the airplane. The flight data recorder shows the aircraft performed flawlessly. This was not a mechanical failure. This was pure pilot error. When questioned, both pilots admit to using their personal laptops in the cockpit, a direct violation of airline policy and Federal Aviation Administration regulations. They admit to becoming so engrossed in their discussion that they lost all situational awareness. They admit to ignoring multiple radio calls from air traffic control. They admit to failing to monitor their navigation, their altitude, their fuel state. They admit to everything because the evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. The FAA wastes no time. Within weeks, both pilots have their airline transport pilot certificates revoked. This is the death penalty for a professional pilot. Without a certificate, they cannot fly for an airline. Their careers are finished. Atlantic Coastal Airlines, in the midst of its merger, terminates both pilots immediately. There is no appeal, no second chance, no opportunity for redemption. What they did was so egregious, so fundamentally incompatible with the responsibilities of a professional pilot that there is no path back. The incident becomes international news. Headlines scream about pilots who flew past their destination while playing on laptops. Late-night comedians make jokes. Passengers express outrage and fear. How could this happen? How could two experienced pilots become so distracted that they lost complete awareness of where they were? The answer, uncomfortable as it is simple. They were human. They made a human error. But in aviation, some human errors are unforgivable, and this was one of them. In the aftermath, the FAA implements new rules. The use of personal electronic devices in the cockpit is now explicitly forbidden in the Federal Aviation Regulations, not just airline policy. Violations carry severe penalties. Airlines enhance their training programs, emphasizing the importance of maintaining situational awareness, even during the quiet phases of flight. The concept of the sterile cockpit, previously applied only below 10,000 feet, is expanded. Pilots are reminded that they are being paid to fly the airplane, not to discuss company business or engage in activities unrelated to the flight. NORAD refines its protocols for dealing with aircraft that do not respond to radio calls. The procedures for scrambling fighters are clarified. The timeline for declaring an aircraft a threat is standardized. Airlines invest in better monitoring systems. Some implement random audits of cockpit voice recordings, checking for compliance with procedures and sterile cockpit rules. Others enhance their crew resource management training, emphasizing the importance of teamwork and mutual monitoring in the cockpit. For me, this incident serves as a powerful reminder of something I try never to forget. Flying an aircraft is not like driving a car, where you can afford brief distractions. At 370 knots, an aircraft covers more than a mile every 10 seconds. In the 78 minutes that Holbrook and Weber were distracted, they flew over 450 miles. That is the distance from Los Angeles to San Francisco. They literally could have flown to a different state, and they did, without noticing. The automation in modern aircraft is remarkable. The Airbus A320 flew itself perfectly for over an hour with no pilot input. The autopilot maintained altitude precisely. The auto throttle maintained speed. The flight management computer followed the programmed route. But automation cannot replace human judgment and awareness. It cannot decide when to descend. It cannot respond to air traffic control. It cannot monitor fuel state and make decisions about diversion airports if necessary. That is why we pilots exist. Not to manipulate controls during the brief moments of takeoff and landing, but to monitor, manage, and make decisions throughout the entire flight. And when we stop doing that, when we allow ourselves to become distracted by laptops or conversations or anything else, we are abdicating our responsibility. Captain Holbrook and First Officer Weber learned this lesson in the hardest way possible. They lost their careers, their livelihoods, their professional identities, but at least they did not lose their lives or the lives of their passengers. This incident, as embarrassing and career-ending as it was, did not result in a smoking hole in the ground. The aircraft landed safely. Nobody was hurt, but it could have been so much worse. If there had been a medical emergency in the cabin requiring an immediate descent, they would not have known. If there had been a mechanical problem developing, they might not have noticed until too late. If another aircraft had deviated into their airspace, they would not have heard the traffic alert. They got lucky, incredibly lucky, that nothing else went wrong during those 78 minutes of inattention. I think about this case whenever I feel myself getting too comfortable in the cruise phase of a flight. When the autopilot is engaged, the skies are clear, everything is running smoothly. That is exactly when discipline matters most. That is when it is easiest to let attention wander, to check a phone, to get lost in conversation. And that is when I remind myself of Flight 5216 and what happened when two experienced pilots did exactly that. The lesson is simple but vital. Stay in the loop. Monitor your instruments. Track your position. Listen to the radio. Maintain awareness of what your aircraft is doing and where it is going. Do not let anything, no matter how interesting or important it seems, distract you from your primary duty, which is to fly the airplane safely from departure to arrival. Because the moment you stop paying attention, the moment you mentally check out, you are no longer acting as pilot in command. You are just a passenger with a fancy uniform sitting in the front of the airplane. And that is not what you are being paid for. That is not what your passengers are trusting you to do. That is not what the license in your wallet authorizes. For Captain Richard Holbrook and First Officer Thomas Weber, October 19, 2009 was the day their careers ended. They will forever be remembered not for the thousands of flights they completed successfully, but for the one flight where they forgot the most basic rule of aviation. Never stop flying the airplane. I am Captain Paul Henderson. Thank you for flying with me today through this cautionary tale. I hope it serves as a reminder that in aviation there are no unimportant phases of flight, no moments when we can afford to stop paying attention. Every flight deserves our complete focus from pushback to parking. Fly safe, stay alert, And never forget that when you are in that cockpit, you hold lives in your hands. Until next time, this is Captain Paul Henderson, signing off.